government, Your Honor. We're ready to proceed. We're ready to proceed with preliminary matters, Your Honor.
Thank you. Good morning. Defense counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. My name is Peyton Robertson, and I am joined today by my second chair, Elizabeth Beaver. And together, we represent the defendant, Kara Bassett.
Good morning to you both. The government mentioned that there were some preliminary matters, so we can address those now.
Yes, Your Honor. I ask that the court take notice that Exhibits 4 through 33 have been pre-admitted into evidence pursuant to Evidentiary Rule 7.
Understood.
Your Honor, would you like us to ask permission before screen sharing these exhibits that have been pre-admitted into evidence?
No, that won't be necessary. Thank you.
Would you like us to ask permission before screen sharing exhibits that we are entering into evidence?
No, that won't be necessary either. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, we ask that stipulations be considered already part of the record, but while we reserve the right to cite them at relevant times throughout the trial, that they not be read into the record at this time.
Okay, does defense counsel have any objection to that?
I have no objections, Your Honor.
All right, sounds good.
Your Honor, I ask that witnesses be considered constructively sworn in the interest of time.
Of course.
And lastly, Your Honor, I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself and my co-counsel.
Sure, go right ahead.
Your Honor, members of the jury, my name is Zoya Charania, and today I represent the United States government.
Good morning, Your Honor, members of the jury. My name is Andre Mayette, and I'm second chair on behalf of the United States.
With that, Your Honor, we are ready to proceed.
All right, thank you, counsel. Would defense counsel like to also introduce themselves to the jury?
Yes, Your Honor. My name is Peyton Robertson, and I'm joined today by Elizabeth Beaver, my second chair for the defense. And together, we represent Kara Bassett, the defendant.
All right, thank you very much. And with that, we will proceed with opening statements, and we will first hear from the government.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. On August 18th, 2017, the defendant, Kara Bassett, had enough. She injected her husband, Don Clark, with a lethal dose of elephant tranquilizer, watched him die, dumped his body in the swamp, and covered up the murder. The defendant had enough. Enough of her husband's empty promises, enough of his controlling behavior, enough of his abuse of her precious elephants. The defendant had enough, and on August 18th, Don Clark had to die. So the United States government charged the defendant with the murder of Don Clark. We must and will prove that the defendant killed Don Clark by injecting him with elephant tranquilizer, and that she did so intentionally and deliberately. We will prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant had enough. By August 18th, she had enough. She and Don Clark had been running the Greater Tallahassee Elephant Park for 6 years. In 2015, the defendant invited documentary maker Joe Young to chronicle life at the park. Mr. Young will tell you about all the arguments the defendant had with Mr. Clark, each and every one about the elephants. The defendant saw the elephants as her champions, as animals who deserved a sanctuary. Mr. Clark kept the elephants in cages, abused them, treated them like property. For a radical animal rights activist, this was torture. Mr. Young will tell you whenever the defendant asked Mr. Clark to change the park into a sanctuary, he ignored her, patronized her. The defendant's rage became so uncontrollable that she threw a vase at Mr. Clark's head. So uncontrollable that she said she would take people to the grave over these elephants. So uncontrollable that Mr. Clark had to file a petition against the defendant, reporting her actions as domestic abuse. This petition will prove that the defendant's rage was so uncontrollable, she threatened to kill Mr. Clark if he didn't let her run the park. The defendant had enough, and she wanted out. Today, you will see the power of attorney agreement Mr. Clark signed on May 1st, 2017. It gave the defendant ownership of all of his assets if he died or disappeared. Lead investigator Steph Branham will tell you that is financial motive. To get what she wanted, the defendant needed her husband gone and his money to stay. And on August 18th, a perfect opportunity presented itself. That day, Mr. Clark texted the defendant about taking a trip to Costa Rica, a period of time where Mr. Clark's absence would not be questioned. This was the perfect opportunity for the defendant, and she took it. That night, the defendant injected her husband with elephant tranquilizer. The log of tranquilizers will show that there were 24 syringes at the park, but on August 18th, one went missing. GPS records will show that the defendant used her husband's car to dump his body in the swamp and then parked it at the airport. The forensics report will conclude that algae from the swamp was found on the defendant's boots, connecting her to the crime scene. The defendant didn't call her husband, didn't text him, didn't look for him, because she knew he was dead in the swamp, because the defendant had enough. Enough of her husband's lies, enough of his controlling behavior, enough of his abuse of the elephants she championed. The defendant had enough and she wanted out. At the end of this trial, I ask that you find the defendant guilty as charged. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Opening statement from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to proceed?
Yes, you may.
The prosecution's charge is murder, but they don't have a body. Don Clark isn't even dead. Don Clark is a man on the run. Good morning. My name is Peyton Robertson, and I stand here representing the defendant, Kara Bassett. As a defense, we bear no burden of proof. That burden rests solely with the prosecution. Opposing counsel must prove her charge beyond a reasonable doubt. That means if by the end of this case, if you have any reasonable doubt in your mind that Kara Bassett did not kill Don Clark, you must find the defendant not guilty. Now, Ms. Tarania came up here and told you a story, but you can't base your verdict on a story. You have to look at facts. So let's talk about what her story. She didn't tell you that Don Clark is a man who, for years, was involved with the Costa Rican mafia. He's been doing business with dangerous people, and there's always that risk. If he slips up, gets on the wrong side of the mafia, he knows his life is in danger. Now, Ms. Tarania wants to downplay all the ways Clark was planning to disappear. You'll hear how he set up large sums of off-the-books money, cash, money that couldn't be traced. But that's not all. He actually planned his estate just in case he disappeared. He granted his wife power of attorney specifically upon his disappearance. We know he was aware of that language. He anticipated having to disappear. He anticipated being a man on the run. In fact, just a few hours before he disappears, he gets a text. This text wasn't from his wife. This text was from Costa Rica, the home of the mafia he dreads. He's frightened. It says, "Call me immediately." He's visibly scared. His face turns deathly white, and he does exactly what that text said. He calls that number in Costa Rica. And that's when he realizes he's in danger. He knows the mafia will follow through, so his only hope is to disappear. So no one can know where he is. So he hatches his plan. He ditches his phone. He ditches his credit cards. He ditches his van. He makes sure he is completely untraceable. Don Clark's plan to be a man on the run. Now, you're going to hear a lot of evidence today, but I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. First, why was he scared? Listen for what happened in the hours leading up to his disappearance, how he reacted to that text from the mafia. Second, where's the body? The FBI never found a body. Ask yourself what evidence proves Clark is actually dead. And third, what was his plan? Dealing with the mafia, he knew he might have to disappear. So he planned ahead. He made sure he would be able to disappear at a moment's notice. Members of the jury, the prosecution's charge is murder, but they haven't even proven death. Don Clark is a man on the run. Find Kara Bassett not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Okay, my understanding is that it looks like defense counsel's opening was 19 seconds over the 4-minute requirement. Do both second chairs agree with that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay,
Yes, Your Honor.
thank you both.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, you're muted.
Yep, hopefully that's the first time, but it probably won't be. So before we get started with the government's case in chief, I'm going to ask everyone to switch over to gallery view. That button's in the top right. This will allow you to see the attorneys and the witnesses at the same time. And with that, Ms. Sharania, if you're ready to start your case in chief and call your first witness, you're free to do so.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the government calls Steph Branham to the stand. Agent Branham, I'd like to remind you you've been sworn in and you are still under oath. Please introduce yourself to the court.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Steph Branham. I'm a senior special agent with the FBI.
It's my understanding there are sectors in the FBI. What departments have you worked in?
Well, the overarching branch I work under is the Criminal Investigations Division. Inside of there, I work in the Violent Crimes Unit. I have since 2007.
And when did you first join the FBI?
I joined the FBI in 2002.
How did you first become involved with this case?
We got a call on August 25th, 2017. That call was from Kara Bassett. She was reporting her husband was missing.
Who all did you and your team interview as part of the investigation?
Well, we interviewed a lot of people. We interviewed Don Clark's children, Phil and Jess Clark. We also interviewed all the staff at the park, Don Clark's friends and business colleagues, rangers from the United States Forest Service assigned to Big Gum Swamp, employees at a nearby airport, law enforcement officials in Costa Rica, and both Don Clark and Kara Bassett's attorneys.
You said you interviewed law enforcement in Costa Rica. Why is that relevant to Don Clark's disappearance?
Well, we wanted to see if Don Clark was on the run. Unfortunately, we didn't find any evidence of that.
Well, what did you learn from your interviews of the Costa Rican police?
We learned that Don Clark's plane hadn't left the Florida airport. We also learned that Don Clark's house in Costa Rica was vacant.
You said you also interviewed Don Clark's attorney, Mandy Tuminelli. What did you learn from this interview?
We learned a little bit about Lisa Clark, Don Clark's ex-wife, but more importantly, we learned that Kara Bassett may have had a motive to murder her husband.
What did you learn about Lisa Clark?
We learned that she had a slightly hostile relationship with Don Clark. She was suing him.
Was that the extent of their relationship?
Well, no, we learned that it had somewhat resolved itself in the months after the interview.
And what about Mr. Clark and the defendant's relationship? What did you learn?
We learned that their relationship was violent. Don Clark even asked his attorney, Mandy Tuminelli, to file a restraining order against Kara Bassett.
Have you seen this petition before today?
Yes, the FBI reviewed that petition as part of our investigation.
Would you recognize it if I showed it to you?
Absolutely.
Your Honor, at this time, the United States government moves to enter Exhibit 34 into evidence. Pursuant to Stipulation 14, it's authentic and accurate in all respects.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
Okay, so admitted.
I'm now showing you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 34. Do you know, according to this document, who was Don Clark seeking protection from?
It says that the respondent was Kara Clark, known today as the defendant, Kara Bassett.
Based on this document, why was Don Clark seeking protection from his own wife?
Well, if we stop there in that Section 3 case, you'll see there are 3 X's next to 3 sections. Would you like me to read those sections aloud?
Yes, Agent Branham.
The first section is that Don Clark was alleging Kara Bassett committed or threatened to commit domestic violence, previously threatened, harassed, stalked, or physically abused the petitioner, and used or has threatened to use against the petitioner any weapons such as guns or knives.
Now, on the second page, Don wrote a note that's in blue. Can you tell the jury what you learned from this note?
Yes, that gave us a clue about a potential motive. The quote read, "Let me run the park my way or I'm gonna kill you."
To be clear, who was Don writing this about?
He was writing it about the defendant, Kara Bassett.
Investigator Branham, how did you rule out the staff at the Elephant Park as suspects?
When we interviewed the staff, we didn't find any potential motive for them to kill Don Clark. We didn't find any reason that they would be better off if he was dead.
Now, I'd like to talk to you about the defendant's interview. Were you present during this interview?
I was, yes.
What did you learn that helped you in your investigation?
It expanded upon the motive that we first suspected from that petition. We learned that the defendant and her husband had a violent and hostile relationship, and that they argued over the Elephant Park quite a lot.
You mentioned they argued about the Elephant Park, but why is that important?
Well, Kara wanted the park to be a sanctuary for the elephants. She wanted it to be more of a non-profit cause. Don Clark, on the other hand, wanted that park to be run for a profit. That caused quite a rift in their relationship. That, combined with the power of attorney agreement, gave Kara Bassett quite a motive to kill her husband.
Would you recognize a copy of this power of attorney agreement if I showed it to you?
I would.
My co-counsel is now screen sharing what's been previously marked as Exhibit 15. Agent Branham, can you explain to the jury the importance of this agreement?
Yes, this power of attorney agreement gave Kara Clark, or Kara Bassett today, control of the park if her husband were to die or disappear.
And did this agreement hold true? Did Kara Bassett gain control over the park?
Yes, she did. When Don Clark disappeared on August 18th, Kara Clark was the person who stood to gain from his disappearance.
Was there any other evidence that connected the defendant to Don Clark's disappearance?
There was. The FBI searched the Elephant Park and found forensic evidence tying Kara Bassett to the scene of the disappearance.
Can you explain to the jury why the GPS records are important?
Yes, we found that Kara Bassett had driven Don Clark's van 139 miles away to Big Gum Swamp.
And where did the car go after?
After remaining at the swamp for about an hour, the car was driven back to Levon Bell Airport.
Now, you mentioned forensic evidence previously. What were the forensic findings that incriminated the defendant?
We found mud on Kara Bassett's boots. And that might not seem suspicious at first, but we did forensic testing on that mud and found that there was a very specific type of algae that was most likely found at Big Gum Swamp.
Investigator Branham, based on all the evidence collected, including the forensic tests, the locations that you searched, and the interviews, who is the primary suspect for the disappearance of Dawn Clark?
The FBI believes that Kara Bassett is the sole person responsible for the disappearance and murder of her husband, Dawn Clark.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Charania. Mr. Robertson, cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to proceed?
Yes, you may.
Now, Agent Branham, you talked a lot about your investigation. Could you tell the jury where it was you found Clark's body?
We never actually recovered Dawn Clark's body. We believe that it was dumped in Big Gum Swamp, though.
You mentioned that swamp. You searched the swamp.
Yes, we tried our best to. It's quite large, though.
Not just you, an entire team searched it.
That is correct, yes.
Now, that was a thorough search, right?
Yes, as thorough as it could be given the size of the potential location.
But you didn't find a single thing.
We did not, no.
No, you canvassed the swamp,
Yes,
and you still didn't find anything.
that is correct, yes.
You even had trained dogs.
Yes, we did bring dogs to the swamp to try and recover any evidence.
They were searching for Clark's scent,
Yes, that is correct.
and even they didn't find anything.
They did not find anything, but again, the swamp is a quite large location, and we believe that Dawn Clark's body could still be there.
All right. Now, you're aware Clark was doing business in Costa Rica.
That is correct. He had a few connections to Costa Rica.
Specifically with the mafia.
We heard an offhand comment by Kara Bassett in her interview about the mafia, but when we investigated, we didn't find any concrete connections, no.
Well, just to be clear, Kara Bassett told you that Dawn Clark was involved with the Costa Rican mafia.
She said that in her interview. Yes, that's correct.
And in fact, the night he disappeared, he actually got a text from Costa Rica.
Yes, we don't know the identity of the caller, but the location was from Costa Rica.
That text was in Spanish.
Yes, I believe he received 2 texts and called that number.
It said, "Call me immediately."
That is correct, yes.
And Clark immediately called that number.
Yes, that is true.
And this was just a few hours before he disappeared.
It was. I believe the call took place before the 11/17 time frame.
Now, you talked about mud and algae on direct. You said it was from the swamp.
There's a high likelihood that it's from the swamp. Yes, the specific type of algae that was on Kara Bassett's boots was in Big Gum Swamp.
Well, let's talk more about that. Florida is a pretty big state, right?
Yes, I would say so.
It has a lot of swampland.
Yes, that is correct.
And there's something you didn't tell us. You never tested the elephant park to see if it was a source.
No, we didn't. Given the high likelihood of that connection being to Big Gum Swamp, we never actually tested the mud in the park itself.
Exactly. You never considered if the mud found on Kara Bassett's boots was from the park.
We considered that, but decided it was not needing a test.
So you're saying you never tested it at all?
Yes, that is correct.
So we don't know if the mud found on her boots came from her own property?
We can't say for sure, but there's a high likelihood that it came from Big Gum Swamp, given the rarity of the algae.
Well, that's actually where you found the samples, at the elephant park.
Yes, that is correct.
Now, Agent Branham, Clark never accessed his bank account or credit cards after he disappeared, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, he actually had other money, though.
We suspect that that is the case, but again, we believe that because he never accessed his primary bank accounts, that when he disappeared, Don Clark died.
Ms. Beer, if you could display Exhibit 5 for the jury. 4, excuse me. Now, once this comes out, I'm showing you a letter from Clark's power of attorney. Now, according to this document, Clark talks about having other money.
Counsel, I hate to interrupt, but I don't believe any document is currently on the screen. Maybe I'm missing something. Is there something on the jurors' screens right now?
There's nothing for me, I'm sorry.
Nothing for me either.
Okay.
Your Honor, I'm trying to display now, and it's saying it's displayed on my screen.
We can just continue, Your Honor.
I'll leave that up to you. Time has stopped. If you want to figure this out, you're able to do so. If you'd like to proceed, it's your prerogative, counsel.
You just give us a few minutes to try to figure it out, and if not, we'll proceed, Your Honor.
Sounds good.
All right, there we go. Thank you, Mrs. Beaver. Now, according to this document, Clark talks about having money that's off the books.
That is correct, yes. Don Clark's attorney, Mandy Tuminelli, did mention that.
It's actually cash.
Yes.
Now, Agent Branham, you don't know what happened with that money, do you?
We never were able to locate Don Clark's off-the-books accounts, no.
So you have no idea where it is?
That is correct, yes.
Thank you, Agent Branham. Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. Any redirect examination from the government?
Briefly, Your Honor. Agent Branham, opposing counsel talked a lot about Don Clark's body in the swamp, but to be clear, did you search the Big Gum Swamp for the body?
Yes, we did.
I'm now showing you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 28. Is this the swamp that you searched?
Yes, that is a picture of Big Gum Swamp.
Did you find Don Clark's body here?
No, we did not. But as you can see, swamps are notoriously hard to search, especially for a body. This swamp particularly was quite deep, and there were many trees. We did our best to search the entire swamp, but we weren't able to actually locate Don Clark's body. That does not mean, however, that it's not there.
And based on your investigation, where does the evidence indicate Don Clark's body is?
Big Gum Swamp.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Charania. Any recross from the defense?
I have no recross, Your Honor.
Okay. Agent Branham, thank you very much for your time. You're excused. Is there anything else from the government, Ms. Charania?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the United States government's rests.
Thank you. And Mr. Robertson, will the defense be putting on a case in chief today?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Joe Young to the stand.
All right.
Permission to proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Please introduce yourself.
Hello, sir. The name's Joseph Young. How are you?
Doing well. Could you tell us where you're from?
Yes, sir. I'm originally from the Edinburgh in the UK, specifically Scotland.
And could you tell us about what you do for a living?
Oh, yes, sir. You see, at heart, I've always been an entertainer. But the fact of the matter is that throughout life, I learned that I didn't really belong on, this side of the camera. And so I progressively realized that I belong on this side of the camera. And then I became where I am today.
Now, Mr. Young, do you know the defendant, Kara Bassett?
Aye, sir.
And how do you know her?
Well, Cara hired me the year 2015. She did so that I could essentially make a documentary in relation to the Elephant Queen, which was going to be in relation to her life at the Great Tallahassee Elephant Park.
Now, what did you do in making that documentary?
Well, I interviewed multiple individuals in addition to the fact that I documented all around the park, as well as Cara Bassett's emotions at the time.
Now, while you were filming that documentary, did you ever meet her husband, Don Clark?
Aye, sir. I became quite familiar with Donnie.
And how long did you work with the two of them for?
Well, I'd say around 3 years, sir.
So you've been working with them for a while. How well would you say you got to know them?
Well, I'd say I got to know them quite well. I was with them practically every other day.
And based on what you saw, how would you describe their relationship?
Well, based upon what I observed from the two of them, they were a close couple. They seemed compassionate, affectionate, loving.
Did you ever see either of them hurt each other?
Well, not directly hurt each other, sir, but you have to take into account the fact that every marriage has its hardships. Every once in a while they did have a fight, but nothing too bad.
Now, opposing counsel talked about some alleged threats earlier. Did you ever see Kara threaten Don?
Threatened, sir? No, I didn't.
And specifically on August 18th, how did their relationship seem?
Well, they appeared to be normal. As I mentioned before, they were a loving couple, so they seemed to be very affectionate that day as well. They conversed well, and it seemed as though it was a normal day.
Now, Mr. Young, when was the last time you saw Don Clark?
The last time I saw Donnie was around 6 p.m. on August 18th.
I'd like to talk more about that. Ms. Beaver, if you could display Exhibit 21 for the jury. Now, Mr. Young, have you ever been shown this document before?
Sir, to be honest with you, I can't, all right, yes, sir. Let me see here. It keeps on going away, sir.
Just give us 1 second, I'm sure it'll be out for you.
All right. Gonna take the cap off in the meantime. It seems like it's about to get serious.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, pardon my hairline.
There we go. So this is Exhibit 21. This is a record of Clark's cell phone. Have you ever seen this document before?
Yes, sir. I was shown it in the midst of the investigation from the FBI.
Now, Mr. Young, what time did you say you were with Clark again?
6 p.m., sir.
Now, looking down at his text messages on this document, did he get any texts at that time?
I see the text messages around 6 p.m. Yes, sir. It looks as though he received a text message at 6 p.m., as I mentioned earlier, from Costa Rica.
Now, were you there when he got those messages?
I believe so, yes, sir.
And what was his reaction?
Well, I was talking to Donnie around 6 p.m. I was discussing my trip to Mexico the following day. And he looked down at his phone and his face went completely white, Even it was quite odd. But following that, he said that he had to handle something, then walked away.
And did Clark have any other further interactions with that number?
I believe so, sir, based upon that little exhibit you were showing.
Yeah. When did he have that interaction?
It looks like it's about at the same time, and it was also from Costa Rica. Looks like a telephone call.
And how long was that call?
It looks like it was about 52 minutes.
Now, Mr. Young, what was the last text Don Clark ever sent?
Well, based upon that exhibit, if I could be shown it again. See here. It looks like it was to Cara, and it was at 11:14 p.m. and it said, "Going out for a while."
And looking at the top of this exhibit, what time did Clark's phone lose signal?
See here. It looks like it was 11:14 p.m. as well, so about the same time.
Now, Mr. Young, when did you find out about Clark's disappearance?
On the 26th there, 6th there. Like I said before, I went to Mexico for a week, and when I came back, I learned about Donnie.
And how did Kara seem to react to the fact that her husband was missing?
Oh, sir, she seemed distraught, to say the least. I'd never really seen Kara like that, to be honest with you.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you, counsel. Ms. Charania, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Young, I'd like to talk to you about August 18th, 2017. You were at the Elephant Park that day, right?
Aye, ma'am, my usual shift.
And around 6 p.m. that day, you were talking to Don Clark, right?
Yes, sir. Pardon me, yes, ma'am.
He said he would see you later, right?
I believe so, yes, ma'am.
But you didn't see Don Clark again, did you?
No, ma'am, I didn't. As I said before, I went to Mexico. I went to the Caribel Airport and went to Mexico.
In fact, around 6 p.m. that day was the last time you saw Don Clark. Is that correct?
Aye, ma'am.
About a year after Mr. Clark disappeared, you went to look for him in Costa Rica, right?
Aye, ma'am. I believe that was, yes, ma'am. It was June of 2018. I went to Mr. Clark's property.
That's a yes to my question. You went to Costa Rica to look for Don Clark?
Aye, ma'am.
While you were in Costa Rica, you searched his home there, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. I discovered that the fan, it was still spinning and the floor was completely spotless. But also, a significant point was that Donnie's clothes were still in his closet.
Well, you're aware that Mr. Clark would travel there frequently before he disappeared, right?
Aye, ma'am, but usually not for a month.
When you went to his house there, the lights were off, right?
Yes, ma'am.
There was no food?
No, ma'am. I didn't look in there for
toiletries?
food at all. Sorry.
There were no toiletries either?
No, ma'am. He seemed to be quite a clean individual.
You stayed in Costa Rica for a week looking for Don Clark, right?
Aye, ma'am. I discovered, well, I guess you can say I conducted a bit of an investigation of myself.
Mr. Young, the 7 days that you were in Costa Rica, not once did you see Don Clark. Is that correct?
Oh, no, ma'am. Not directly. But as I mentioned a moment ago, and I'd like to elaborate it, if you don't mind, when I asked members of the community of the Hermosa Beach, they said that they had seen Donnie near that time.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. This is cross-examination. Opposing counsel asked the witness about these statements, about his investigation into Costa Rica, and the witness is just giving his answer.
I agree, counsel. I'm sorry, counsel.
Your Honor, I asked the witness if he had seen Don Clark. At the moment, the witness was about to allege responses from people that he had talked to, which had nothing to do with my question. I just asked that he not elicit explicit hearsay to the jury.
Then do you wish to move to strike the response as non-responsive?
Yes, Your Honor, I move to strike that response from the record.
Okay, any objection to that?
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel asked the witness whether he saw Don Clark. He's saying while he personally did not see him, he talked to people who said that they did see him. Your Honor, that is within the scope of opposing counsel's question. The witness is allowed to give a brief answer.
Okay, last response, then I'll rule.
Yes, Your Honor. When I asked the witness if he had seen Mr. Clark, if I wanted to know that he had talked to other people, I would have asked that question. So simple yes or no would suffice. Anything after that would have been non-responsive.
Okay, I'm going to strike the portion of the answer that followed the witness's own perceptions. Anything about what other people told the witness about who they saw will be stricken from the record.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. Young, you said you spent about 3 years at the park almost every day, right?
Hi, Mum.
So you know that there's elephant tranquilizers kept on the property, right?
I believe so, yes, Mom. That's what they did in the event that the elephant started acting out.
You're aware that these tranquilizers were kept locked up in a shed, right?
I don't believe it was a shed, Mom. It was more of a supply facility.
It was locked up though, right? You had to have a key to get in?
I believe so, yes, Mom.
You're also aware that the defendant was one of the few people with a key to these tranquilizers, right?
Hi, Mum, but I believe there were many others who did as well.
Is that a yes to my question? The defendant had a key to the tranquilizers?
Yes, Ma'am, absolutely.
You also know that the defendant and Don Clark live alone on the property?
Well, no, Mom, there are elephants there.
Don Clark and Kara Bassett are the only humans on the property?
To my knowledge, Mom, yes.
Now, you said you spent a lot of time with Kara Bassett, so you know that her whole life revolves around these elephants, right?
I'd more so say her life revolves around protecting the elephants and making the calls, you know.
She's told you she wants to protect the elephants, right?
All right, Mom, as I mentioned
She takes
ago.
care of them every day?
Pardon me?
She takes care of the elephants every day?
Oh, yes, Mom, that's why she works there.
Now, Mr. Young, you conducted interviews as part of your documentary, right?
Hi, Mom.
You recorded them?
Yes, Ma'am.
And you would recognize a clip from one of the defendant's interviews if I showed it to you?
I believe so, Ma'am. I believe I provided around 14.
Your Honor, at this time, the United States government moves to enter Exhibit 38 into evidence. Pursuant to Stipulation 14, it's authentic and accurate in all respects.
Any objections?
I have no objections under Rule 801 D2, Your Honor.
All right, Exhibit 38, I believe, is so admitted.
Mr. Young, please listen silently.
Yes, Ma'am.
People look at me and they think I'm sweet and nice. Go on. Keep underestimating me. I will lobby senators. I will protest big businesses. I will get in your face. I will take people to their grave if I have to. I will do anything to protect these elephants.
Mr. Young, to be clear, that is the defendant, right?
Well, Mom, I'm going to be honest with you. I couldn't really see it on the screen. All I heard was the audio. But based upon what I heard, yes, Mom, that does sound like Miss Bassett.
Mr. Young, you've witnessed a few of the arguments the defendant had with her late husband, Mr. Clark, right?
A couple, yes, Ma'am. But as I mentioned ago, every marriage has that.
Every single one of these arguments was about the elephants in the sanctuary, right?
Not specifically in the sanctuary, Ma'am. Just the general
But they
cause.
were about the elephants and the purpose of the park. Is that correct? I'm sorry, Mr. Young, is that a yes to my question?
Your Honor, it appears that the witness has been kicked off the Zoom chat.
Yeah, that appears to be the case. Oh, there we go. Mr. Young seems to be back.
Turned off. I apologize about that. I apologize about that.
Yeah, it's all right, sir.
Mr. Young, these arguments that you witnessed were almost always about the sanctuary or the elephant park, right?
No, Mum, not specifically about the elephant park, but some of them, yes, Ma'am. Most of it revolved around the elephants in general, how the cause was essential.
These arguments about the elephants, you would see Don Clark wave off the defendant's complaints, right?
Well, I guess you could say that, yes, Ma'am.
You heard Don Clark say that as long as it's my park, as long as it's my money, it's my park, right?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, hearsay, may I be heard?
Yes.
Your Honor, opposing counsel is referencing out-of-court statements being offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Please.
Your Honor, this is not at all being used for the truth of the matter asserted, but rather to show the effect on the listener, the defendant in today's case. These statements would, as Mr. Young is going to testify, make the defendant extremely angry, so it's not being used for the truth that Mr. Clark would always run the park his way, but rather to show the effect these statements had on the defendant.
Are you about to ask the witness about the effect of this statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Mr. Robertson, any response?
Yes, Your Honor. If opposing counsel is going to use these statements for the effect on the listener, I'd ask that she lay that foundation before eliciting these statements.
I'm not sure what foundation would be necessary other than the statement itself, but what I will do is offer a limiting instruction to the jury that the statement won't be offered for the truth of the matter asserted, but rather the effect on the listener. And with that, I'll overrule the objection.
Yes, Your
Yes,
Honor.
Your Honor. Mr. Young, you would see the defendant get very angry, is that correct? I'm sorry, Mr. Young, what was that?
I believe Mr. Young may have gotten kicked off again.
I think he's muted.
I apologize. It seems as though my computer is acting out. But to your answer, to your question, Mum, yes, I had seen that a couple times, but I don't think she meant anything by it.
In fact, a few weeks before Mr. Clark went missing, you saw the defendant throw a vase at Mr. Clark's head. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, ma'am. But as I mentioned a moment ago, every marriage has that hardships. I don't think
Mr. Young, I'm not asking about all marriages. Is that a yes to my question? Kara Bassett threw a vase at Mr. Clark's head?
Yes, ma'am. I did hear about that.
And about a month later, you found out Mr. Clark was missing, right?
Yes, ma'am. That is correct. Around, yes, ma'am. As I mentioned before, August 26th.
After Mr. Clark went missing, Kara Bassett converted the park into an elephant sanctuary. Is that correct?
It took a little while, but yes, ma'am. As I mentioned a moment ago, she wanted it to be a cause.
To be clear, it was only after.
Counsel, I believe time's expired. I gave you a little bit of leeway to make up for opening statements going over time on defense counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, may I just finish my last question?
Sure.
Of asking. Thank you. Mr. Young, to be clear, it was only after Mr. Clark went missing that the defendant converted the park into a sanctuary.
I would say she upgraded it, Mum, not changed it.
But it was after Mr. Clark went missing, right?
Yes, Mum, that's correct.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Mr. Robertson, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. Now, opposing counsel asked you about your trip to Costa Rica. Could you tell the jury more about what you saw there?
Yes, sir. See, as I mentioned a moment ago, I examined all around Mr. Clark's property. I examined the fact the floor was completely clean. The fan, it was still spinning. And as I mentioned a moment ago, Mr. Clark's or Donnie's clothes were still in his closet. But in addition to that, when I asked members of the Hermosa Beach community about Donnie.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
May I be heard?
First, a question for the government. What statement are you objecting to?
Your Honor, I believe opposing counsel and Mr. Young are about to elicit the statements that locals in Costa Rica asserted when he asked them the question if they had seen Don Clark. Those statements are being used for the truth of the matter asserted and are therefore inadmissible into evidence.
Mr. Robertson, what are the statements that are being elicited?
Your Honor, I believe my witness was going to say that some natives in Costa Rica told him that they may have seen Don Clark. We're not offering this for the truth of the matter asserted, but rather for notice that Mr. Young was aware of these statements and how that contributed to his investigation in Costa Rica.
Your Honor, in that case, if it's not being used for the truth of the matter asserted, I would object to relevance and improper lay witness testimony. Mr. Young is a documentary maker, not an FBI investigator, not a detective. So his findings in an investigation, as they say, would be completely irrelevant as well as confusing to the jury.
Any response to that?
Yes, Your Honor. Firstly, I'm not asking the witness to give any expert opinion. As he testified, he went to Costa Rica, and I'm merely asking about what he saw and what that led him to believe. Your Honor, this doesn't require any expert opinion. I'm just asking him based on what he saw, what did he find and what did he believe? This is a lay opinion under Rule 701.
It sounds a lot like a statement that's being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. I don't think the effect on this witness's investigation, so to speak, is relevant here. Is there any other basis for why this should be admitted?
Your Honor, the opposing counsel asked the witness about his visit to Costa Rica and whether he saw that. Your Honor, that would statements should be considered within the scope of that, and whether or not, as he did or did not see Don Clark.
Your Honor, my objection is not to the scope of redirect examination. My objection is to the inadmissible hearsay that is going to be proffered by Mr. Young about what the locals in Costa Rica said. Like I stated previously, that is being used for the truth of the matter asserted, and if it is not, then it is not relevant in today's case.
The court agrees. I'm going to sustain the objection.
Your Honor, I move to strike any testimony that was elicited by Mr. Young.
I don't believe any answer was put on the record, but if so, it'll be stricken.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Young, do you believe if Don Clark is still alive?
I do, sir.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Thank you, counsel. Ms. Sharani, I don't believe you have any time for a recross. So at this point, Mr. Young, you're excused. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, sir.
And Mr. Robertson, is there anything else from the defense?
No, Your Honor, the defense rests.
Okay. Would the parties like to take a couple minutes before we start closing arguments, or would you like to proceed on through?
Your Honor, we're ready to proceed.
The defense is also ready to proceed, Your Honor.
All right, great. Let's see. I believe I have additional instructions for the jury before the start of closing argument, and here they are. We will now hear closing arguments from each party. Everyone should please switch back to speaker view. Also, since both witnesses have completed their testimony, you can complete the witness portion of your ballot. So I'll give the jurors a couple of minutes to complete the witness portion of the ballot, and then we'll get started with closing arguments. All right, I'll give it another minute until when I see 12:55, I'm on the East Coast. All right, it is now 12:55. If there are any jurors who still need a little bit more time, please message me privately in the next 10 seconds or so. Otherwise, we'll get started with closing arguments. Okay, hearing nothing from the jurors, we will go ahead and start with closing arguments. We'll start with the government. Ms. Sharania, the court is with you.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, I'd like to reserve any remaining time for rebuttal.
Of course.
May it please the court. Don Clark was not a perfect man. He cheated on his first wife, kept animals in cages, didn't listen to the defendant, but that does not warrant death. And that is nothing compared to what the defendant did to him on August 18th, 2017. The defendant had enough and she wanted out. As the United States government, we proved that the defendant killed Don Clark and that she did so intentionally and deliberately. We proved this beyond a reasonable doubt. We met our burden. There's no doubt that the defendant had an unhealthy obsession with elephants. Mr. Young told you she loved elephants, would do anything to protect them. We saw a video of the defendant herself admitting she would take people to the grave over these elephants. And that is exactly what she did to her husband. Mr. Young told you the defendant pleaded her husband to turn the zoo into a sanctuary. Instead of listening to his wife, he waved off her complaints, made empty promises, and told her that as long as it was his money, it was his park. Mr. Young told you these arguments would get violent to the point where the defendant threw a vase at Mr. Clark's head, to the point where Mr. Clark had to file a petition to protect himself from the defendant. He says here that the defendant abused him, hurt him physically, and threatened him. Mr. Clark wrote in here that the defendant said, "Let me run the park my way or I'm gonna kill you." Just a few months later, the defendant did exactly that. Enough had been thought and said and felt. She needed Mr. Clark gone and his money to stay. She had enough. The defendant knew the power of attorney agreement would give her control over the park if Mr. Clark were to die or disappear. So she was waiting for the perfect opportunity. She was waiting for her way out. And on August 18th, 2017, when her husband texted her about an upcoming trip to Costa Rica, she had everything she needed. The perfect opportunity. A period of time where Mr. Clark's absence would not be questioned. The defendant used an elephant tranquilizer from the park to kill her husband. She dumped his body in the swamp and parked the car at the airport to go with her story that Mr. Clark was in Costa Rica. The forensics report showed that the algae from the swamp found on the defendant's boots, a wheelchair from the park, and on Mr. Clark's car were from the Big Gum Swamp. That connects the defendant to the crime scene. Agent Branham told you there were tranquilizers from the park missing, and the log of tranquilizers corroborated that. The defendant was one of 4 people with access to these tranquilizers, and she and Mr. Clark were the only ones at the park when one of them went missing. The following week, the defendant lied to her employees and told them Mr. Clark was in Costa Rica. She didn't call him, didn't text him, because she knew he was dead in the swamp and his phone was with him. With her husband gone, the defendant finally got what she wanted. Mr. Young told you 2 months before Mr. Clark disappeared, 2 months after Mr. Clark disappeared, the defendant took control over the park. She freed the elephants from their cages. She stopped letting people get too close to them. She was finally able to protect her precious animals. She finally got rid of her husband and kept his money for her and the elephants. That's exactly what she wanted. The defendant tried talking to her husband about making a sanctuary, and he ignored her. She argued with him, and he patronized her, controlled her, told her it was his money, so it was his park. The defendant threatened to kill her husband, and he still didn't budge. The defendant had enough. No matter how she put it, no matter how aggressive she got, her husband didn't care. So she took matters into her own hands. The defendant didn't want revenge. She didn't want to punish her husband. She just needed him gone. She needed him to disappear. And on August 18th, 2017, she did just that. She killed her husband using the elephant tranquilizer. She made him disappear. Members of the jury, Don Clark is dead. He may not have been perfect, but he was a father. He was a human being. And he is dead because the defendant had enough. You must deliver justice and find the defendant guilty as charged. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Charania. Mr. Robertson, closing argument for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to proceed?
Yes, you may.
The prosecution's charges murder, but they haven't even proven death. The truth is, Don Clark isn't dead. When the mafia threatened his life, He had to get away. He had to hide. He had to abandon the life he knew. Members of the jury, Don Clark is a man on the run. Now, the prosecution holds the burden of proof today. The opposing counsel must prove her charge beyond a reasonable doubt. But why? Why do we hold the government to the highest legal burden in our judicial system? Because they're asking you to make a decision that will affect Kara Bassett for the rest of her life. They can't ask you to guess, they have to prove it to you. And if there is a single reasonable doubt in your mind, if there are any other reasonable explanations as to why Clark is missing, you must find the defendant not guilty. Now, opposing counsel came up here and accused Kara Bassett of the most serious crime on the planet. But you can't base your verdict on the story. You have to look at what you actually heard today. So let's talk about that. And there's something she can't get around. If Don Clark is really dead, where's the death certificate? Where's the autopsy report? Where's the body? There's nothing. Now, she tried telling you that the body was hidden in a swamp, but the FBI thoroughly searched that swamp. They canvassed the entire area, used trained dogs, and they found nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not even a single drop of blood. Now, the prosecution didn't consider if there's no body, no proof he's actually dead, could Clark still be alive? Well, why would he just disappear like that? Think about it. This was a man who was involved with the Costa Rican mafia. So I want you to remember what happened the night he disappeared. He gets a strange text in Spanish. Call me immediately. This text was from Costa Rica. Now, Joe Young was there when he got that message, and I think his reaction is telling. Clark looks down at his phone. His face turns white. He's scared. I need to deal with this. And he does. He calls that number and talks for 52 minutes. This is all just a few hours before he disappears. What was that phone call about? Think about it. He was doing business with the mafia. He's scared. Maybe he's been threatened. He knows the mafia will follow through, so his only hope is to disappear. To hide from the mafia, from the FBI, even from his own wife. Do you think it's a coincidence he's getting these calls and texts and disappears just a few hours later? He knew the danger. He had to act quickly, or it would be too late. Here's the thing. If Clark needed to disappear, he had to make sure he didn't leave a single trace behind him. He had to start a whole new life. He couldn't use his phone, his credit cards, his bank account, nothing. So what does he do? He texts his wife he's going out, and immediately he disconnects his phone. It never returns the signal. He makes sure no one can trace him through his phone. But what about money? I mean, he has to live on something, right? No, you heard today that he never accessed his bank account or credit cards, and he couldn't if he needed to disappear. But Clark had other money that he told his lawyer was off the books. And this wasn't some small sum. We know he had enough off the books cash to purchase his new life. His life as a man on the run. Now, what does the government offer as proof today? They offer two things. First, opposing counsel told you about mud and algae. Now, if they're going to make this bold claim that the mud and algae could only have come from the swamp, you would think they would have tested it against the elephant part to exclude it as the source. They didn't. You know what? Elephants' parks are muddy. Couldn't the mud have just come from there? But what's the strongest evidence today? How do we know that Clark's disappearance was something he planned? I want you to look at this. Exhibit 15, the power of attorney. Now, opposing counsel contends this is evidence of guilt. It's actually the opposite. It proves Clark's intention was to disappear. I want you to look right here. This is his signature. He knew he was signing a document that said, upon my disappearance. Opposing counsel, I guess they think Clark's dumb, that he doesn't know what the word disappearance means. Members of the jury, Clark was anything but dumb. He knew. He was afraid of the mafia. He knew he might have to disappear. He intended to disappear, and that is why they didn't find a body. Don Clark isn't even dead. Don Clark's a man on the run. Here we are at the end of this case. The prosecution is asking you to convict Kara Bassett of murder, but they haven't provided a shred of evidence he's actually dead. Why? Because he's not dead. Don Clark is a man on the run. Find Kara Bassett not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. Ms. Charania, any rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. Don Clark is not a man on the run. He is a man who underestimated his wife's passion, who underestimated her ability to do what she needed to do for her elephants. Investigator Branham told you they searched the Big Gum Swamp, but you saw the picture, members of the jury. The swamp is murky, filled with trees, deep, still water. Don Clark's body is at the bottom of that swamp, at the bottom of that murky water, because the defendant had enough. Investigator Branham told you he talked to locals in Costa Rica, he talked to the Costa Rican police, the authorities there, and not a single one of them had seen Mr. Clark. Not a single one of them had seen his plane. Mr. Young told you Mr. Clark's residence in Costa Rica was empty. No food, no toiletries. It was spotless. Members of the jury, Don Clark is not in Costa Rica. He is in the bottom of the swamp because the defendant had enough. Enough of his empty promises, enough of his controlling behavior, enough of his abuse of her precious animals. When she threatened to kill Don Clark, she wasn't kidding. When she had the opportunity, she took it because she had enough. She wanted to protect her elephants, and that is exactly what she did. She needed her husband gone and his money to stay. And on August 18th, she did just that. Find the defendant guilty of the murder of Don Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. All right. We will have the jurors now complete the rest of their ballot and submit.